wouldn't be the beginning of the championship season without doing a bit of a review or preview, should we say, of what us Derby fans can expect after 2 years away. And there's one man that we normally come to when it comes to all things EFL and the Championship, and that's Gab Sutton. Gab, thanks for joining us, mate. It's been a couple of years since Derby were back in the Championship, but they've managed to do it. And obviously in this next 15, 20 minutes, we're going to be talking all about how hard it's going to be for Derby. And obviously we'll have a run through of the movers and shakers and what you're expecting from the Championship. But thanks very much for joining us, mate.
Pleasure. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Gab, walk me through this. The Championship's basically, I'm not going to say a completely different league, but it's a much different league than when Derby departed a couple of seasons ago. While we've been focused on League One a lot of the time, there's a lot more money flowing into the Championship now. There's a lot more, teams splashing the cash on terms of big transfer fees, a lot more players going for bigger fees, a lot more quality coaches coming in from both domestically and overseas as well. How much has this division changed in the last couple of years?
Well, I think possibly it's got a little bit weaker than it was last season because last season you had the three relegated sides who were all real forces at the top of the table in Leeds United, in Leicester City, and in Southampton, who all got not around 90 points. I think Leicester and Ipswich got a few more than that, but Leeds got 90. I think Ipswich as well. You've got the managerial brilliance of Kieran McKenna, who I know is on to really big things. So I think we don't have that quite so much anymore. And I think it's going to be a bit more of a level playing field, and I think that makes it for a really exciting competition.
Jason, it is certainly excited to be back in the Championship. Gab, what are your thoughts on Derby at this moment in time? Obviously, there's still a long way to go in the transfer window, so it's difficult to kind of take stock of any team, at this stage of a season or this time of year, because even after the transfer window, it still takes 4 or 5 weeks for everybody to start to gel and, 10, 15 games, the league starts shaking out. But in this moment in time, if I may press you, what are your thoughts on Derby? I know a lot of us supporters were kind of excited the early part of the window with the signings that we brought in. It stalled in the last week or 10 days in terms of, especially with getting a goalkeeper and things like that. But what are your thoughts on Derby heading into the season on Friday night, opening night in the Championship?
I think a little bit apprehensive is probably the word, because I see a lot of players that you've signed when you first came down to League One in 2022 who served a real purpose in making sure that you got up within 2 years and made that rebuilding process speedier than it might have been. But I also think it's meant that you've signed players who have served a real purpose in League One but might not necessarily be able to grow with the step up, which is the sort of thing that I always look for when it comes to assessing whether squads can have what it takes to do more than survive. I don't really see that with Derby. I like Ivan Cashin and Curtis Nelson. I like a couple of the signings like Ben Osborne and Caden Jackson. I like Ebu Abadams, who you've signed, and Nathaniel Mendes-Lang as well. So I think that's your core of really important players, with the goalkeeper as well. But I also feel like there's a lot of players in that squad who have probably already served their primary purpose for Derby County, and that's where a little bit of my apprehension comes from.
I think that's when. So obviously we're talking the signings that Derby have made, Gab, and I sit here at the moment thinking it's not the world's worst. We've managed to get, I think it's 7 through the door. We decimated the midfield over the summer, which is a bit of a surprise, I suppose, when you start deconstruct a promotion winning side. But obviously those players like your Horahans, your Corey Smiths, they were signed by Derby in League One for a reason. Obviously they probably weren't going to make that step up to the Championship. Obviously we lost Max Bird to Bristol City, which I'm still a little bit oiked about, but it is what it is. So obviously the midfield had to be strengthened. one player obviously returning to his boyhood town. I was quite surprised when Derby managed to pull that off because of obviously the career that he's had away, certainly at Forest. Obviously, then later on, he's played quite a few games for Bristol City, for Sheffield United. For me, I appreciate we have got some leaders in the side, but I think I said almost straight away, Ben Osborne could well come in as Derby's captain. Now, it's not been announced, I don't believe, as of yet, that he the captaincy, but somebody like Ben Osborne to guide Derby in this championship season, he's a pretty good pickup, isn't he, on a free transfer?
I think so. I think his versatility is something that Paul Warren's going to like. Similarly, his work ethic. He's someone who can play at left back, left wing back, central midfield. He can fill in a variety of roles. And I think Warren's going to love that side to him. So I see him being a really useful player this season.
And then in terms of, obviously, like as you said, Ibu Adams, we know what he could do in League One. Obviously didn't get a chance for Cardiff really in the Championship, so it remains to see if he can keep up to it. And he's been a little bit in and out of pre-season. He's had a couple of niggles, so we've not really been able to rush him. But another player, obviously from the Premier League, that Derby have managed to pick up, and I went to see Derby's pre-season friendly on Saturday against Real Valladolid, is David Ozo. Now, he obviously had a bit of a cameo in that Palace side last season. He stands at over 6 foot. He's built like a barn door. Is the exact type of young, hungry player, again, that somebody needs in the Championship, because we know it's going to be a dogfight. But the lad can also, obviously, from coming out of Palace's academy, he's somebody that can put his foot on the ball. He can get stuck in, but he can also, set play up. And I saw quite a bit of that from him in the friendly on Saturday. And so far, his couple of games for Derby in pre-season have been pretty impressive. And then, of course, I suppose you've got the bit of the Dutch wild card in Kenzo Houtmane, however you pronounce. We're still getting used to that pronunciation. He's got everything, Gab, that would see that he could excel in a tactical Championship side. I think the one thing that we all, as Derby fans, have kind of have said so far, and Corey did in some of the chats that he had with AZ Alkmaar podcast, is that the physicality side, we see it so many times with certain players. I mean, we go back to like an Eze back in the Championship a couple of years ago, but he managed to find his way through it. Is there a place in let's face it, a team that I think is going to be in that bottom 7 or 8. I'm under no illusions that Derby are going to do an Ipswich, because I just don't think they're going to. But obviously, Derby are going to be fighting in that bottom sort of 8. Is that type of player in Kenzo Houtmane just one of those that in a Leeds, in a West Brom or something like that, his talents probably are going to be more on show? Whereas I think for a lot of Derby's games this season, it's going to be roll the socks up type of football. Can you see him coming in and making an impression on the Championship?
Let's hope so. I certainly think Derby have got to offer different ways of playing, Jason, because I look at it. I think Paul Warren's sides previously have operated with a target man, like he had Michael Smith at Rotherham. But if I look at Derby striker options at the moment, you've got Jerry Yates, who you've signed from Swansea. Swansea, who isn't really a target man. James Collins is decent with the ball to feet, but he's not. You wouldn't say he's a target man. So for me, unless Derby can counterattack through Corey Blackett-Taylor and Nathaniel Mendes-Lang, and Caden Jackson as well, I don't really see anyone who you can go long to and you can back them to sort of win those headers and get the team up the pitch. So from that point of view, you've got to find different ways of maybe looking after the ball at certain moments, and that's where I imagine possibly Ozo or Gudmine can make an impact.
And I think that the striking options was going to be sort of the next best thing. Sorry, the next thing to talk about. Of course, Derby come from League One with the second best defensive record, I believe. So there wasn't any major need for surgery in the back line. We haven't brought really anybody in. Obviously, we've had Ryan Nyambe come back into the fold, who we were missing for 3-4 months last season, who is, we know, a very solid, I think, a very solid option in the Championship. So for us to get him in League One was a bit of a surprise when he came in, actually, and his quality did show. So not massive need for a load of surgery in that back line, but up front, as you've just mentioned, Jerry Yates, Caden Jackson, who does, I think he's going to play more of a winger, but you've got Jerry Yates, James Collins, and then I think you're down to probably our academy star in Dejon Brown. Certainly from a Derby fan point of view, we're looking at that as that's not enough firepower from somebody who obviously pays close attention to the whole of the Championship. Do you think that is probably the major area where Derby are gonna come up short this season, just with that front line?
Well, I don't know if it's just about firepower, because I think Paul Wharton's sides can be efficient without having any one major goal scorer, but I think they've got to be able to facilitate the style. Now, I'm not sure how much I trust Paul Wharton to coach really good patterns of play with using the ball from deeper areas and creating chances for James Collins or for Jerry Yates. So unless you're able to counter-attack, as I mentioned earlier, through some of those quick players that we've spoken about, then either it's going to be, maybe the midfielders that I've mentioned, who can help look after the ball a bit better, or actually bring in a target man who's really industrious, who can hold the ball up for other players and actually facilitate the goal scoring potential elsewhere in the team. But having said that, you've already got two out and out strikers. So unless you offload, Jerry Yates, you've brought in Jerry Yates. I don't know if James Collins will be happy to be third choice centre forward for one position this season. So for me, I think the right target man would definitely help Derby's chances of staying up. But I'm also a bit apprehensive about what that would do to somebody like James Collins, and whether you'd be able to offload him, and how that would all work.
And Gab, we know that Paul Wharton wants to bring in another striker as well as numerous other players. I think we need about 8. I think Jason is what Paul had said before the end of the window. So still a lot of surgery to do there. Gab,
sorry, is that 8 from now, or is that 8 over the course of the window?
I think that's 8 from now until the end of the window.
Oh, right.
Because we have no depth. We have no depth.
Jesus, you're leaving it late then, aren't you?
We need 2 goalkeepers. I know he wants defensive. He wants a center half, right, Jay? He wants a target man.
Oh, of course, yeah. The goalkeeper's gone.
Yeah, he needs 2 goalkeepers. Yeah. He needs a center forward. He needs some bodies in midfield. I think he'd want another wide player in, and he probably wants a fullback as well, I would think. We just need depth, Gab, because we're fine. But if we get any injuries, which never happens, the wheels will come off the bus very quickly. Gab, I want you to open up your aperture a little bit, and we'll step away from Derby now and look at this league as a whole. You said at the beginning you thought it was probably one of the weaker championships, especially weaker from last year in terms of getting some of those big boys out of there. And there are a few teams that scare me, like on paper. I'm scared by a few of them. Who are you really looking out for this season? Are there any clear-cut favorites for promotion, and who are they, if there are any?
I think Leeds are the obvious favourites for promotion, and I think they'll be most people's champions in most of the 1-24s that we see, for obvious reasons, really. They got to 90 points last year. They do that again, they probably win the league. For me, I've actually got a bit of a niche theory, which is I actually think Sunderland win the league, because I think they've got such an exciting squad, and I think they're just on the cusp of in terms of the age profile, I think they're just about to hit their peak, and I think they've got some super exciting players that could with potential that's sort of off the scale, really. So I happen to be really excited about Sunderland and what they can do. I think Leeds will be the popular pick, and I think Luton could be up there as well.
I've looked at the transfer business of Millwall, because they signed a player I follow rather closely, Macaulay Lang's staff. And also Coventry as well seem to make some smart signings. They seem to me to be a couple of the dark horse teams that are going to be in and around a playoff run, making a playoff run late in and around that top six. Who are your picks for top six?
So my top six is Sunderland, Leeds, West Brom, Middlesbrough, Luton, and Sheffield Wednesday. So Wednesday are my dark horses. I think with Danny Rowe, he's the highest potential coach in the Championship, and I think, I think Sheffield Wednesday are going to carry on that form. Bearing in mind, from about November last season, they've been performing pretty much like a playoff side. So for me, Sheffield Wednesday could be very dangerous.
Who are your I'm not gonna there could probably be one from 4, 5, 6 teams that could get relegated. Who are your bottom six in no particular order, or who are your dead certs for relegation at this moment in time?
I'll give you my bottom six. So I've got Millwall in 19th. I've got Watford in 20th. I have Derby just staying up in 21st. And then going down, I have Oxford, Plymouth Argyle, and Blackburn.
Fair enough. You see that, Jason? He was very clever there, Gabby said keep Derby just above the water line. And
Absolutely.
I'm actually really
It's for the
pleased to
people at
see.
Rams Review, really.
Yeah, see, exactly, Gab. This is why we bring you on to feed the narrative, to give the good vibes. Jason, I'm pleased to see Plymouth down there a little bit because they made a terrible call in getting Wayne Rooney as a manager because he's just terrible. Jay, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting coming back up against Wazza, isn't it? I mean, no real hard feelings, obviously, with him at Derby, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see how he does after a couple of failings
Yeah,
elsewhere.
no hard feelings for the guy. I just don't think he's a very good coach. So when Plymouth got him, and I know Plymouth were kind of striving there, and it went kind of pear shaped very quickly when Schumacher left to Stoke. That went terrible for everybody. And then I saw they brought Rooney in, and I was like, wow, that's really okay. Fair enough. 3 bites of the cherry, and you still could. Maybe the England manager, if he gets sacked from Plymouth, we never know. It's what happens in football. You get a better job.
Well, absolutely. You just never know, do you? But I'm just looking at the moment on the Opta analysis analyst website. They've got Leeds favourite, Middlesbrough. Obviously, they've got Burnley up there. Somebody who we haven't mentioned so far. Norwich, up in and around it. And then surprisingly, Gab, I'd like to get your opinions on this. It's quite interesting that you've got Sunderland as one of the favourites because they've got them as down as just staying up in 21st.
Yeah,
But
so I'm happy to make a more extended case for Sunderland if you're interested.
yeah,
So
certainly in a second. But I also want to get your
sure.
opinions on the Opta have gone for absolutely propping up the Championship this year. Is Cardiff City. Obviously, us Derby fans probably haven't paid too much attention to the Championship over the last couple of years, obviously with us not being in it. But you know, Cardiff's one of them sides I would say are a shoe-in sort of mid table kind of side. But with Sunderland as well, I would fully expect to see them progressing again and coming in and around that sort of top 6 to top 10 kind of areas. What do you think the supercomputer is? Why do you think they've put those two looking like that they're going to be struggling for Championship safety?
Well, let me give you my take on Sunderland then, and we'll come to Cardiff after that. I think that I look at this core of players that Sunderland have got 7 players that I'm really excited about. Right, I think Anthony Patterson can be one of the best goalkeepers in the league this season. One of the best right backs in Tri Hume. Dan Ballard is a centre half. I'm a huge fan of. In midfield, they've got Dan Neil, who's already got some EFL experience under his belt, and he's been England under 20s, 21s pedigree. You got Joe Bellingham as well, who I think is a prodigious talent. And out wide, they've got potentially 2 of the best wingers in the league in Jack Clark and Patrick Roberts. And I think that it's just going to take a couple of tweaks. Now, previously, they've gone for a really youth-heavy recruitment policy, which has compromised them in the short term because it's meant that they've suffered from a lack of experience. But it's also meant that the young players they've signed now have experience. And actually, only 3 of the 27-man squad they have now are teenagers. Most of them are in their early 20s and are sort of just about to hit their peak. And given the potential that I think some of those players have, I think under the right management, they could hit a massive spike in their development, bearing in mind they've got one or two tweaks that have been made, like Alan Brown coming into midfield, who's a Preston North End stalwart, to bring a bit of bite and a bit of experience that I think is going to make all the difference. They've got Luke O'Nien, who's an absolute mentality monster, who I think is going to rub off on some of these other players. And I also see some of the young lads they've got elsewhere in the squad continuing to develop. So I think if Reggie Labrie can be a steady hand, I just think naturally those players are just going to shoot up in their development. And I think in an open championship where I'm not necessarily I don't see a dominant force this season. For me, I think Sunderland could really take advantage of that. So I'm really excited about Sunderland. I can see why people have gone the other way on them, but for me, they're going to be serious contenders.
Gab, I want to get your thought on another EFL championship specific thing and then a Derby specific thing, and then we'll let you go. Give me 2 or 3 players here that are going to be breakout stars in the championship this season that is must see TV that you have to tune in to watch.
Well, Chris Rigg of Sunderland, I'm going to go back to Sunderland, but he's only 17, right? But he got into Sunderland. He featured for their first team in an FA Cup match at Shrewsbury Town when he was 15 years of age. I mean, think of how much potential and talent you have to show to get to play first team senior football in an FA Cup match at 15. So for me, Chris Rigg is a prodigious talent. I think he could be anything he wants. He's rejected interest from across Europe to sign a 3-year deal for Sunderland this summer, which I think shows what he sees in the project and the opportunities that Sunderland are going to give him. So don't be surprised if Chris Rigg ends up being the next Jude Bellingham and is ripping it up. And by the way, with Sunderland have got Bellingham themselves in Jobe as well. So Chris Rigg is definitely going to be one to watch. For Leeds United, I think Matteo Joseph is a really exciting prospect. He's Spain under-21s. He's a centre forward. Lots of Leeds fans I talk to want him to be starting regularly this season. They were going to loan him out to Lincoln City, but he's had such an amazing pre-season with the Whites that he could actually start this season. So for me, Chris Rigg of Sunderland and Matteo Joseph of Leeds.
Fair enough. And Gab, before we let you go, I want to ask one more Derby specific question here, because we've talked about him a couple of times. We've talked about the influence that managers can have on teams and whatever. Paul Warne, we know that he's had a fantastic record in League One. What's that? 4 or 5 promotions from League One now. We know that his record in the championship is not as glamorous. Is Paul Warne the right man at this stage to take Derby and keep them in the championship, or do you have reservations thinking that Paul Warne might be gone in the new year? I'm not trying to stir the pot on any managerial hot seat, just for clarification. Just wanted to get your read on, do you think he now has enough experience that he can adapt his game? Have you seen enough that he can adapt his style to be successful in the championship, which he's not been able to do before?
I think that Paul Warne has a very special skill, which is his vulnerability and his ability to galvanize people on an emotional level that very few other managers I've seen can do. I think he's had techniques where he would write on a whiteboard in the dressing room who he's doing it for, and he would encourage other people to do the same. And it bonds people into such a tight-knit group where, you hear stories from his Rotherham side about people giving themselves to lifts to completely different parts of the country because of a personal situation, and they care for one another on a deeper level. And I think that's all because of Paul Warne's leadership style that he encourages. So I think that's a massive strength that he's got. At the same time, I think we've seen other managers like Gareth Ainsworth, for instance, where he's shown at maybe a smaller club in League One that he can use his motivational qualities to get incredible results at that level. But then when he's gone up to the Championship, it hasn't quite worked out for him, especially with QPR. And I do wonder whether that's going to be the case with Paul Warne. You can obviously argue that with Rotherham, the challenge that he had was the finances and not having the resources, and he might have more of that with Derby. But I'm actually not convinced that technically and tactically he's going to be up to Championship level. And I do think that there's a theme at Derby County where there's players at the club that have served their primary purpose in League One and might not be able to serve that same purpose in the Championship and be part of the next phase. I think that's true of a lot of players, and dare I say it, I do wonder if that could be true of Pool 1.
Fair enough. Well, Gab Sutton, thank you very much for your time. Jason, anything else from you?
No, that's everything. I'm sure we'll catch up further on down the line throughout the season to see how these rough predictions that we've made, see how they
Especially the
get on.
Sunderland one, Jason. Especially
Yeah, no,
the Sunderland one. I'm
yeah,
keeping the receipt.
absolutely.
Guys, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Can I ask you a question? Where do you think Derby are finishing this season?
Above the waterline, Gab. As long as we stay in the division, I really don't care. Bottom fourth.
No,
As long as we
that's
stay
not what
above
I
the
asked you. I
waterline.
didn't ask you, Corey. I didn't ask you where you want Derby to finish or what your targets are. I'm saying, what do you think? Where do you think Derby will finish?
I think we'll finish above. I think we'll finish fourth bottom. It'll be a dogfight
Okay.
all season, but I think we'll have a little bit enough to do it. And I think that there's other teams that will struggle, and there's always a surprise team that struggles. And I think there's three worse teams than us in this division.
I'm going
Jason?
19th.
19th.
I would
Okay.
agree. I think there are 4 or 5 teams worse than Derby. I think, but we'll see. It'll be all about if we can get on a bit of a roll. I think that'll be it, because winning's a habit, but losing's also a habit as well. We've got, I think it's around November, we've got, or is it December? We've got an absolute awful run of fixtures over December. So it all depends. If we're sort of midish table coming into December and we're not on an absolute slide, then yeah, I think we'll be all right. But yeah, if we're hitting around the Christmas period in bad form, I think that could spell the end of Paul Warne for the new year, personally. But yeah, I think I'd be surprised if he's still the manager of Derby by the end of the season, I have to say. And that's no disrespect to him, but for everything sort of we've just said, I'm not confident that he's cut out for the Championship. And yeah, I think anything above 19th would be a surprise. Anything less wouldn't be a shock, but I think we've got enough, just about. But we'll see. We'll catch it. We'll catch up in 4 or 5 months' time, and when Derby are sat top flying, and Paul Warne's the king, we'll revisit it. But no, honestly, don't see that happening. But
well, listen, thanks so much for having me. I just to give you a bit of a shameless plug, you can for those listening or watching on YouTube, you can drop me a follow on Twitter/X. For at Gab Sutton, and I tweet lots of EFL opinion starters, so you can get involved with your Derby perspective on that. So that'd be much appreciated if you could drop me a follow. I'm also available on TikTok if you're on there, and you can also follow EFL Debate or subscribe to EFL Debate even on YouTube and on Spotify, where I have championship podcasts every Monday at 5:30.
No problems at all. Gab Sutton, friend of the podcast, EFL specialist. Thank you very much for your time, mate.
Pleasure. Cheers, Jason.